I'm the rabbi of the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, which is a strange sounding name. It's a synagogue that was founded by Mordechai Kaplan in 1922. And Kaplan was the founder of Reconstructionism. And I'll say a few words about that in a moment. As far as we can tell, we think he took the name Society for the Advancement of Judaism because at that time in the 20s, there were lots of Jews who were joining the Society for Ethical Culture, which was not too far away in Manhattan. And in part, Kaplan was trying to reconstruct Judaism, hence the name, in a way that would appeal and respond to the interests and concerns and questions of contemporary Jews in his time. So he wanted to, in some ways what he was saying is you can be a very modern person, be very engaged in American culture, and you don't have to go to ethical culture. You could still remain Jewish in this Society for the Advancement of Judaism.
That's great, and maybe a little bit, I guess.
I could say more. I mean,
do you want to do more then? Why don't you talk about like what's happening today?
Well, I'll say a little bit more about Reconstructionism, and then today.
Go ahead.
Kaplan looked at his world, and he thought Judaism really needed to be reconstructed. One of the ways he thought about that was that there were lots of Jews who felt that traditional notions of God were not really believable anymore to people who had, in the early 20th century, who had really been influenced or persuaded by the scientific revolution and rationalism. And therefore Kaplan suggested that we should change our notion of God, reconstruct it from what he called a supernatural God, that is a God, the traditional belief that God acts in the world, that God rewards and punishes, and rather say that, no, because we don't see that happening, right? All the old questions that have been there from the beginning, why do righteous people suffer, et cetera, and also this kind of new impetus to those questions because of this rational sense of, but the world doesn't seem to work like that. The world works by the laws of nature. That's why, someone gets cancer. It's not because God's punishing them, et cetera, et cetera. So Kaplan said, we don't have to believe that anymore. We can believe that God is he used the term, the power that makes for salvation, which is kind of an old-fashioned term, but really he would say that when you want to see where God is acting in the world, you see it when people are acting with caring and compassion to each other. That's God acting in the world. And our impulse to act in that way is in a sense, God, the God within us. So that was one important area that Kaplan reconstructed. And also in 1922, when he founded the SAJ, as we call it, his daughter was turning 12, and he said, why should she not have some kind of ceremony? Let's have a bat mitzvah. And that was the first bat mitzvah in the world, was because Kaplan looked and said, why not? And I think the ongoing challenge for Reconstructionism, and in some ways Kaplan's basic teaching, is that we need to continue to reconstruct. It's not just, if something's problematic, let's change it, but really that each generation of Jews needs to reconstruct Judaism in response to its own sensibilities and its own needs. And I think the challenge for the synagogue today and for the Reconstructionist movement, and we might say for all Jews, is to how to reconstruct Judaism in the current situation, and to think about the challenges that we have, and in some ways to think radically. I mean, Kaplan wasn't the first person to say that God doesn't act in the world, but in certain ways that was still a radical thing to say in the 1920s within the Jewish community. When Kaplan and others edited a prayer book that reflected some of these changes, in 1945 the prayer book came out. The prayer book was, and the editors were excommunicated by sort of ultra-Orthodox, and they actually burned the prayer book publicly, which is still remarkable to think of in 1945, after Nazis and book burning, that anybody could do that. But so he was still seen as a radical. So what would be, in some ways, a radical response to the contemporary situation? Not just a little tinkering around the edges. Let's make it a little better. Let's make things, for instance, to take the area of prayer and services. So there are lots of synagogues that have tried to make the services more lively, to bring in new music, to make them more participatory in terms of people singing, all of which is great and is a good thing. But perhaps when it comes to services and liturgy, it needs something more drastic, more radical, in order to be able to respond to people's needs and questions and searching today. And if you're looking for the answer, I can't give it to you, but I think for me at least, that's an area that I'm focused on and thinking about what might, perhaps prayer needs reconstructing, and what might be done that still keeps it tied to the past, right? In that sense, Reconstructionism doesn't say let's reject the whole past and start again. So part of the challenge is how do you maintain a connection to the tradition and yet also be willing to change it, and to do both those things is not simple at all.